If you've ever dreamed of a perfect wedding crystal lights, the chime of champagne glasses, and blessings filling the air, then try to imagine it differently. Because for Tammy Owens, all those lights only illuminated the cruelest moment of her life. The wedding took place in an old mansion in Savannah, Georgia, a place where every wall whispered the stories of the Green family, people so wealthy they could buy the sky itself, yet none of them had ever known how to love. Tammy, a small-town girl, stood amid a sea of elegance, still believing she had touched her dream. She had loved Jaime Green, a man with a deep smile, bright eyes, and a voice so tender it made her whole heart believe in beauty. He proposed with the family's heirloom ring, saying softly, "From now on, you'll never be alone again." And Tammy believed him. She believed him until the very end, even as she stepped into the honeymoon suite, filled with the scent of roses and the steady ticking of the clock. That night, Savannah was gentle as silk. Summer cicadas hummed beyond the window, and the fragrance of jasmine drifted in from the garden. Tammy still wore her thin white dress, the golden light glinting off her hair. She looked at Jaime, a trembling smile on her lips. He said only one thing: "I'm tired." No explanation, no kiss, no embrace, not even a touch. He simply turned away, pulled the blanket over himself, and left her there, alone in the dark. The room suddenly felt unbearably vast. Tammy lay on the enormous bed, listening to the clock tick as if time itself were mocking her naivete. She told herself, he must just be tired. It's been a long day. But something inside her cracked like glass, breaking at a pitch too high for human ears. She stayed awake past midnight. Moonlight poured silver through the curtains. All was silent until she heard a sound. At first, faint moans, distant and uncertain, then clearer, closer, coming from the hallway leading to Jaime Green's room, her mother-in-law. Tammy sat up straight. Her heart pounded, her breath caught in her throat. Impossible, she thought. It must be a mistake. But the sounds grew sharper, soft laughter, ragged breathing, and a woman's voice, familiar enough to wound. She turned toward Jaime. He lay still, his back to her, breathing evenly asleep, or pretending. Tammy stepped out of bed. Each bare foot against the cold stone floor felt like stepping on fear itself. She moved through the darkness, guided only by the dim light spilling from the hallway. She knew she shouldn't go. She should turn back, pretend she'd heard nothing, known nothing. But something inside her, the instinct of someone who's lived through scarcity, who knows when danger is near, pushed her forward. At the bottom of the stairs, golden light bled from Jolene's door. It was half open. Tammy stood there, heart hammering against her ribs. 1 second, 2. Then her trembling hand touched the doorknob. The door creaked open, and in a single breath, Tammy's world shattered. Jaime, the man who had vowed himself to her only 6 hours ago, was in the arms of Belle Hartwick, her mother-in-law's closest friend, the very woman who'd toasted her at the reception. On the armchair sat Jaime Green, legs crossed, a glass of wine in her hand, eyes cold and amused as if watching a fine play. No scream, no words, only silence, thick and suffocating, like smoke filling her lungs. Jolene noticed her first, smiled slowly, took a sip of wine, and whispered, "Oh, not your turn yet, Tammy. We haven't even begun to teach you what this family is really about." The words struck her like a slap. Jaime turned his head, his eyes empty. No shame, no surprise. Only one sentence, smooth and commanding: "Close the door." The room exploded inside her mind, laughter, moans, the clink of glasses, all merging into a sound more monstrous than anything she'd ever heard. Tammy stepped back, one step, then another, before turning and walking away without a word, without a tear, without looking back. Behind her, Jolene's voice drifted out, soft as a breath. "Well, that was easier than I thought." And fool. Laughter followed 3 voices, a sound that would haunt Tammy for the rest of her life. She returned to her room, legs trembling. The white dress lay tossed over a chair, her heels scattered on the floor. She stood in the cold, motionless, unsure if she was awake or dreaming. She could have screamed, smashed everything, woken the house, but she didn't. Instead, she looked around quietly, then began to pack. A small suitcase, a few personal things, a photo of her mother, her college diploma, a bracelet she'd made herself. Each item she placed inside felt like tearing away a piece of her heart. Before leaving, she found a blank sheet of paper on the vanity. The black ink trembled in her hand as she wrote, slow and deliberate, as if carving fate itself, "I will never beg for your love. Watch me rise." She set the note beside her wedding ring. She slipped off the white dress, put on her old denim jacket, and walked barefoot down the stairs. Outside, dawn was breaking. The first light of morning streamed through the windows, brushing her face, a face stripped of tears, left only with quiet resolve. As she passed through the kitchen, Jolene's half-empty wine bottle still sat on the counter. Tammy paused, glanced at it, and let out a small laugh, not from joy, but from the kind of emptiness that comes when a heart has shattered beyond repair. She stepped out the door. The Green family gates stood open, the gravel road stretching long and silent ahead. Each step tore through the old skin of who she'd been. The morning wind carried the scent of jasmine, of damp earth, and of endings. Far off, through the mist, she saw the small bus stop. Tammy sat on the bench, holding her suitcase, staring into nothing. An old bus pulled up. The driver asked, "Where to, miss?" Tammy answered softly, her voice rough from holding back tears, "As far away as possible." The bus rumbled to life, its wheels grinding against the gravel. Through the window, she saw the Green mansion one last time, its roof gleaming beneath the dawn. Once, it had been where she thought happiness would begin. Now, it was only ash. She whispered to herself, "They think they destroyed me, but they don't know. They just created a phoenix." And the bus carried her away, toward a distant city where a new chapter waited. Inside Tammy Owens, something had died, but in those ashes, a new fire began to burn. When the old bus pulled away from Savannah, Tammy Owens had no idea where she was headed. She only knew she had to leave, far away, far from the moans, the laughter, and the cold eyes of Jaime Green. The window was filmed with dust, the scenery outside drifting by like shredded pieces of memory. Every mile, every passing sign reminded her she had lost everything. When the driver asked, "Where do you want to stop?" Tammy answered softly, "Atlanta. I heard there's work there." The bus dropped her at Atlanta's central terminal on a rainy afternoon. The sky was grey, the air thick with mist, the smell of gasoline and coffee blending together. Tammy stepped off the bus, clutching her old suitcase. Inside were a few clothes, a handful of handmade trinkets, and the last scraps of pride of a woman freshly betrayed. That first night in the new city, she had nowhere to go. Hotels were too expensive, the motels too frightening. So Tammy stayed in the bus station's waiting room, leaning against her suitcase, hugging her knees, eyes closed. The loudspeakers kept calling out departure times, over and over, lulling her into an exhausted sleep. When she woke, daylight had crept in. A janitor said gently, "Hey miss, you can't sleep here overnight." Tammy just nodded and gave a weak smile. She walked for hours through crowded streets, flashing billboards, the smell of donuts from corner shops, car horns, and bar music tangled into the chaotic rhythm of city life. Among the masses, Tammy felt like a speck of dust, nameless, placeless, unseen. No one knew she had once been the bride of the Greens. On her second day, she found work washing dishes in a small diner. The morning shift started at 6 and ended at 4. Her hands cracked and blistered from soap and hot water. But when she held her first few bills of pay, she whispered to herself, "I'm still alive." At night, she cleaned offices, graveyard shifts in an old building, long hallways, flickering fluorescent lights, the sharp sting of bleach in the air. Each night, Tammy pushed her mop, listening to the clatter of its wheels, the sound of her own existence. On rare free days, she sat at Peachtree Park, opened her suitcase, and took out bits of wire, broken glass, and beads to make small pieces of jewelry. Her fingers were rough, but her eyes began to shine again, the light of someone who still believed she could create beauty. Some nights, she looked up at the city sky, where the glow of skyscrapers mimicked 1,000 artificial stars. Tammy whispered, "Mom, I don't know where I'm going, but I don't want to fall here." One evening, while washing glasses, she heard the manager bark, "Hey, too slow. You want to quit?" Tammy bowed her head and murmured, "I'm sorry. I'll be faster." No one knew she'd once been a rich man's bride, standing in a white gown before hundreds of guests. Now she was just a night shift worker with cracked hands and stolen naps on bus seats. Yet through all the exhaustion, Tammy carried a small box. Inside were a few pieces. She'd made a silver bracelet, earrings shaped from broken glass, and a copper pendant braided into a phoenix. Each time she opened it, she heard her mother's voice. "Beauty doesn't need to be perfect, sweetheart. It only needs to be true. So be calm." One morning, as Tammy cleared tables at the cafe, an older woman paused at her tray of trinkets. Her name was Opal Crenshaw, in her 60s, hair streaked silver and brown, eyes kind yet keen. She picked up the phoenix bracelet, turning it in the light. "You made this?" Tammy nodded shyly. "Yes, just a hobby." Opal smiled, the kind of smile of someone who recognizes herself in another. "No, dear, that's not just a hobby. It's the feeling of someone who's been hurt, but still wants to love the world." Tammy looked up. Their eyes met. For the first time in months, someone truly saw her. A few days later, Opal Crenshaw returned. She ordered a cappuccino, set a fabric bag on the table, and said, "I have a small art gallery in Decatur. I think you should come. Bring some of your work, will you?" Tammy could hardly believe her ears. That night, after work, she gathered her handmade pieces into a box and took the bus to the address Opal had given. The gallery was small white walls, the scent of pine, and soft jazz playing from an old radio. Opal stood in the middle of the room and pointed to a corner. "That space is empty. I want you to put a few of your things there," Tammy whispered. "But I'm not an artist." Opal smiled. "Who says? An artist isn't someone with a degree. It's someone who turns pain into something others can touch." And so, in a quiet corner of Crenshaw and Company Gallery, a small wooden shelf appeared. "Tammy Owens, Jewelry of Light." In the beginning, only a few people came. A mother bought glass earrings for her daughter. A middle-aged man chose a copper bracelet because it reminded me of someone. Tammy didn't sell much, but each time someone stopped, she realized something profound. They weren't just buying jewelry, they were buying feeling. One afternoon, Opal laid a hand on her shoulder and said softly, "See, you don't need to shout to be seen. Just be honest, and the world will find you." That night, Tammy went home to her small rented room with a single bed and a window facing a parking lot, but her heart glowed. For the first time since the darkness began, she smiled at her own reflection. Then she started to draw, designing new pieces inspired by ash and light. She called the collection Phoenix, Rebirth. Each bracelet, each necklace, bore the traces of its past cracks, seams, flaws, but that's what made every piece unique. Just like her. One evening, Opal invited her to stay for tea. They sat by the window, watching the rain. Opal said, "I had another life once, Tammy. I was betrayed too, lost everything. All I had left were my hands and a bit of paint." Tammy asked, "How did you get through it?" Opal answered, her voice as soft as breath, "You don't get through it, dear. You just keep going." That sentence lit a small fire inside Tammy's chest. She began saving every penny for tools, opening a small stall at the weekend market. Whenever someone stopped, she told them a little about her work. "This one's made from the broken glass of an old window," she'd say. "I polished it because I believe what's been broken can still reflect light." Word spread about the girl who made jewelry from discarded things. A local paper wrote a story, "The Woman Who Turns Trash into Symbols of Hope." Tammy read the article, and tears fell onto the page, not from pride, but from the quiet realization that she had truly survived. That night, she stood on her balcony, watching the city lights shimmer on the glass. The breeze moved gently through her hair, and inside her, a voice her own this time whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." Far below, Atlanta buzzed with chaos and noise, but in that small apartment, Tammy Owens was writing the first chapter of the Phoenix legend. Atlanta had given Tammy a chance to survive, but her heart longed for something more. She wanted to create not just a store, but a haven, a place for people like her, souls who had once been left behind. The following spring, Tammy left Atlanta with her worn-out suitcase, a few pieces of jewelry she had sold, and a small business card from a friend. If you want a real beginning, go to Seattle, the city of those who never give up. Seattle greeted her with rain. The city smelled of roasted coffee and sea mist, neon lights reflecting off puddles like shards of broken mirrors. Tammy rented a small room above a laundromat peeling paint, a window overlooking a damp street, and began again, one more time. She worked day and night, designing jewelry, selling online, taking custom orders from friends of friends. But she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed others not just for work, but to build a community of rebirth. The first person she met was Dante Livingston, a young blacksmith from the Fremont Industrial District, with a past marked by street racing and bar fights. They met by chance when Tammy brought some copper wire to his workshop. Dante looked up and asked, "You make these to sell?" "I make them to survive," she replied. He laughed. "Sounds familiar. So do I." From that day on, Dante helped her with the tougher metalwork. He didn't talk much, but every time the welding fire flared, Tammy saw the image of a phoenix in it, brilliant, but scarred by flame. The second was Thora Beckwith, a fashion designer who had been fired from a major company for being too old for the trend. She came into Tammy's small shop one afternoon, picked up a necklace, and asked, "Who made this?" "I did." Thora studied it carefully. "It has a soul. Ever think about pairing it with fabric?" "I'm working on a collection about scars." "Oh?" Tammy smiled. "Let's try together." And so, Phoenix Artisan began to take shape. Not as a company, not as a brand, but as a small circle of broken people warming each other through their craft. Dante rebuilt the space. Thora sketched a logo of a blazing phoenix. Tammy carved their motto on the wall: "We rise, we rebuild, we shine." On opening day, it was still raining. The shop was no bigger than an old classroom, its walls patchy, its yellow lights trembling. Thora arranged the handmade pieces on a wooden table, Dante fixed the displays, and Tammy hung a small sign on the door. Phoenix Artisan Collective. Their first customer was a red-haired girl in a transparent raincoat, her face shadowed with sorrow. She picked up a bracelet shaped like a flame and asked, "Who came up with this idea?" Tammy answered, "It's a symbol of someone who's burned but still wants to live." "Line." The girl looked at it for a long moment, then whispered, "My brother died in a house fire last year. I want this to remember him." When she left, Tammy sat down, pressing a hand to her chest. For the first time, she felt something warm spreading through her, as if her pain had turned into something good for someone else. The first day, they sold 8 pieces. The second, 5. The third, none but Tammy still opened the shop, brewed coffee, played jazz, and told herself, "We don't need many people, just the right ones." By the 10th day, a reporter from the Seattle Voice stopped by and wrote a small piece about the store for those who fell and rose again. Overnight, Phoenix Artisan became known. Customers came not only to buy, but to share stories, to rediscover faith that beauty could grow from wreckage. Tammy watched the shop fill with people and felt tears blur her eyes. She remembered the dark room in Savannah, Jolene's laughter, Jamie's cold stare. All of it seemed far away now, like an old dream fading with time. She no longer needed witnesses, nor validation. All she needed was the light on the faces of those who found themselves again through her creations. That was enough. 3 months later, Phoenix Artisan had become a small phenomenon in Seattle's craft scene. Hundreds shared photos of their pieces online. The story of the woman reborn from ruins spread, and Tammy had to grow comfortable with being called a symbol. One morning, she received a call from Cyrus Malone, an entrepreneur who had gone bankrupt twice, now running a social investment fund for community recovery projects. He said in a low, gravelly voice, "I read about you. You're not just selling jewelry, you're healing people. Come meet me." They met in a cozy wooden cafe. Cyrus wore a worn leather jacket, his silver hair and bright eyes alive with conviction. "I lost everything once, Tammy," he said, "but I learned you're never truly empty as long as you can still give." "You want to invest?" she asked. "No," he smiled. "I want to stand beside you." With Cyrus's guidance, Tammy learned how to manage finances, how to grow without losing her soul. He taught her about value, loyalty, and above all how to say no to the seduction of fame. When people start praising you, he warned, that's when you're most likely to lose yourself. Phoenix Artisan expanded, opening 2 more locations, one in Capitol Hill, one in downtown Seattle. They hosted free workshops for women who had survived abuse, teaching them to make crafts to earn their own living. Tammy appeared on TV shows, but every time she repeated the same words. I'm not successful. I just survived long enough to see something beautiful. 1. Meanwhile, in Georgia, Jaime Green sat in her old mansion, staring at Tammy's image on the television. Her wineglass shattered against the wall. That girl, she hissed. She was supposed to disappear. But in Seattle, Tammy was no longer a victim. She was a leader, a small light among those who had once been lost. Dante still laughed his rough laugh. Thora kept sketching tirelessly, and Opal stopped by often with pastries and gentle advice. Each of them was a fragment of the same reborn mosaic. One late afternoon near year's end, they gathered in their first shop, the one with chipped walls and the old sign, still warm and full of life. Tammy raised her coffee cup and said, "We've come a long way, but this is only the beginning." Dante grinned. "How far do you plan to go?" Tammy looked out at the rain beyond the window, her eyes distant. "Until no one in this world ever has to feel as worthless as I once did." "That's true." Laughter filled the room, mingling with the sound of rain. The scene closed on the shimmering lights of Seattle, a city of those who had fallen, yet still knew how to rise. From the ashes, Tammy Owens had kindled her first flame, a flame that would spread, burn bright, and never be extinguished. They say that great empires don't collapse from outside enemies, they fall because of the cracks within, the ones they pretend not to see. For the Green family, those cracks had been there for years, and that autumn, they finally split open. On Monday morning, the Savannah Post ran a bold headline: "The Green Empire, Glory, Wealth, and Filthy Secrets." Journalist Kai Sutherland, a name Jaime Green had never heard before, released a 3-part exposé detailing decades of bribery, money laundering, and political manipulation tied to Green and Associates. Figures, names, documents, all laid bare, leaving no room for denial. For the first time, the name Green no longer meant aristocracy, but corruption. In the old mansion, Jolene threw the paper to the floor, red wine spilling like blood. "Filthy vermin," she screamed, eyes blazing. "How dare they come for me?" Belle Hartwick, once her friend, then Jaime's lover, now just a shadow in the corner, watched her trembling. "You should calm down," Belle murmured. "Maybe there's still a way out." Jolene spun around, her gaze sharp as a blade. "A way out? In this world, Belle, the ones who retreat are the ones who die." Meanwhile, Jaime Green, once dubbed the Prince of Savannah, sat in a rented apartment downtown, eyes fixed on the TV as reporters swarmed his mother's estate. Every news ticker cut deeper into his pride. Green and Associates under federal investigation. CEO Jaime Green declines to comment. Heir Jaime Green disappears from high society. 1. He looked around the bare room, just a broken chair and a few empty boxes. 3 years ago, his honeymoon suite had smelled of roses and champagne under golden light. Now, only the whistle of wind through a cracked window remained. One evening, the TV replayed a clip of Tammy speaking in Seattle, her eyes fierce, her voice calm. "I wasn't reborn to take revenge. I was reborn so no one could define me again." Jaime watched for a long time. A faint, sorrowful smile crossed his lips. He whispered, as if confessing to the silence, "You've won, Tammy." But Jolene, she would never surrender. She made call after call, lawyers, journalists, politicians bribing, threatening, commanding. Yet nothing worked. An empire that rotted from within couldn't be saved by money, not when everyone she'd once bought was now scrambling to save themselves. When federal agents stormed Green and Associates headquarters, Jolene sat drinking, her hand trembling but her gaze still defiant. "They wouldn't dare arrest me," she hissed. "I'm Jaime Green." But they did without hesitation. News cameras caught her walking out in a white dress, chin high, wrists cuffed. Savannah fell silent. People who once bowed to her now watched through their screens, whispering. The same magazines that once glorified her ran think pieces titled, "Why Empires Fall." Across the country, in her Seattle apartment, Tammy Owens watched the broadcast quietly. No smile, no satisfaction. Just calm. She turned off the TV, poured herself a cup of tea, and gazed at the rain outside. "Sometimes," she whispered, "justice doesn't need to scream. It only needs time." 6 months later, the Green scandal still dominated headlines. Green and Associates was officially bankrupt. Assets frozen, properties seized, partners gone, and in Savannah's high society, the name Green had become synonymous with disgrace. Belle Hartwick vanished without a trace. Rumor said she'd fled abroad. Jolene was held under special supervision, still living in her mansion but stripped of power. Jaime, once dressed in tailored suits and camera flashes, now sold phones at a local shop. When he received his first paycheck, Jaime stared at the bills in his hand, a strange mix of shame and relief. No more commands, no more mother pulling strings, no more glittering lies. Just him and the emptiness that came with freedom. That night, he sat in his small room, holding an old photograph Tammy in her white dress, smiling shyly. The image made him close his eyes, his hand tightening. "You're still alive, aren't you?" he murmured. "You made it." In Seattle, Phoenix Artisan had become its own quiet empire. Their third store had just opened in Portland. Vogue America featured her under the headline, "From Ruin to Radiance." The story of a woman who refused to fall. In the interview, Tammy said one line that moved readers to tears. "The day I left the Green Mansion, I thought I'd lost everything. But it turned out, I was only beginning in the place I truly belonged." Dante and Thora celebrated with her. Opal cried when she saw her on TV. But Tammy, watching her own image on screen, felt a quiet ache, because behind the glow of success, a whisper lingered in her heart. Forgiveness doesn't come from triumph. It comes from peace. She wondered if she had truly found peace or if she was just standing on a mountaintop, afraid to look down at the ashes below. One afternoon, she received an unmarked envelope. Inside was an old newspaper clipping Jolene Green in handcuffs, and a small note written in a familiar, elegant hand. "I don't ask for your forgiveness, but thank you for making me face the mirror. J.G." Tammy sat in silence for a long time. She folded the note, placed it on the table, and looked out at the drizzle beyond the window. She didn't know where Jaime was now, but somehow, she felt that wherever he was, they were both in their own strange ways still atoning. Final scene. Tammy stood on the rooftop of the Phoenix shop, gazing out as the Seattle sunset painted the sky in red and gold. She turned to Romy, her new assistant, who was arranging the display. "You know something, Romy?" "Yes? Some things that break shouldn't be rebuilt. They just need to stay as they are reminders of who we once were." Romy nodded softly. Tammy looked into the distance, the light catching her face, strong yet gentle. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and rain. A chapter had closed, and though those who once hurt her had fallen, Tammy Owens chose stillness not on victory, but on peace. Because to her, the most beautiful revenge was not making others suffer, but no longer letting them have any power over her. New York City, the city that never sleeps. Tonight, among 1,000 lights, the Waldorf Astoria shimmered brighter than ever. A live jazz band played, glasses clinked, and gowns sparkled as guests moved across the grand ballroom like stars orbiting a silver moon. The Griffith Foundation was hosting its annual gala to raise funds for women rebuilding their lives after crisis. And the guest of honor this year was Tammy Owens, founder of the Phoenix Artisan Collective. On the invitation card, a simple line was printed beneath her name: "The woman who turned ashes into light." Tammy stepped out of the limousine in a gold gown, her hair pinned high, makeup soft but striking enough to hush the crowd of photographers. Flashes erupted. Voices called out, "Tammy, over here. How does it feel to return to New York as an icon of empowerment?" She smiled, poised, measured, as though all that glitter no longer had the power to shake her heart. Because inside, the only thing she truly felt now was a quiet, steady peace. As she entered the ballroom, she recognized familiar faces: entrepreneurs, artists, designers, reporters who had once interviewed her. Music, laughter, and champagne shimmered together, like a dream woven out of light. But in the far corner near the exit, a man stood alone. His suit didn't quite fit, his tie was crooked, his shoes worn. He was no longer Jaime Green of the Green family. He was simply James Green, a phone salesman from Brooklyn, who had saved for a month to buy the cheapest ticket to this gala. His hand trembled as he clutched the invitation. Sweat beaded on his brow, but his eyes held steady. "Just 5 minutes," he whispered to himself. "I just need 5 minutes to say it, even if she hates me forever." When the spotlight hit the stage, Tammy stepped up. The host introduced her as the Inspirational Woman of the Year. Applause filled the hall. Tammy took the microphone, looking out at the hundreds of faces turned toward her, people who saw her now as a symbol. Her voice was calm, low, and warm. "3 years ago, I had nothing but my 2 hands. But there was one thing: I never lost the belief that I could stand again, even when someone tried to break me." The crowd fell silent. She paused, her gaze distant. "I'm not here to speak about revenge, but about freedom. Because when you truly forgive yourself, you no longer need anyone else to lose." Thunderous applause erupted. Tammy bowed slightly, stepped off the stage, and then, in the crowd, her eyes met his. Jaime Green. Thinner now, hair unkempt, dark circles under his eyes, but in that gaze, she saw something she'd never seen before: honesty. She froze. The noise around her faded until all she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat. He began to walk toward her, slow, careful steps, as if afraid that one wrong move would shatter the moment. "Tammy." Her throat tightened. Her voice came out steady but trembling beneath the surface. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," he said, "but I have to say this just once." "Ho." People nearby began to notice the tension. A few reporters raised their cameras, sensing a story. Tammy glanced around, whispered sharply, "Not here, Jaime." But he shook his head. "If I don't say it now, I might never have the chance." The music faded. The host had left the stage. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath time, pausing for them alone. Jaime stopped in front of her, eyes glassy, hands trembling. "Tammy, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know, everything I did, it was wrong. There's no excuse that can make it right." Tammy said nothing. Her gaze was deep, calm, too calm. "You know, Jaime," she said softly, "the cruelest thing wasn't that night. It was how you acted afterward, as if nothing had happened." Jaime bowed his head, voice breaking. "I know. My mother, she controlled everything. But I should have protected you. I should have stopped it." "Yes," she replied quietly, "but you didn't." Silence. The entire room watched. No one spoke. No one moved. Only the golden light flickered across the marble floor, glinting off the shoes of a man whose legs were shaking. Then Jaime dropped to his knees. In that glittering ballroom, the man once called the Prince of Savannah knelt before the woman he'd destroyed under 100 watchful eyes. "I'm not asking you to take me back," he whispered. "I just need you to know I truly regret it." Tammy didn't move. A camera flash went off, but even that sound couldn't pierce the heavy stillness in the air. She took a slow breath and spoke, her voice clear. "You didn't lose me, Jaime. You threw me away, and since that day, I've learned to never let anyone do that to me again." Tears streamed down his face. She looked at him not with anger, but with a hard, quiet mercy. "If you really regret it," she said, "then live better. Don't carry guilt as your reason to exist. Carry it as proof that you've changed." She stepped back. The gold light fell across her face, serene, radiant, unshakably strong. The ballroom was silent. Tammy turned, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, each step closing a chapter. Before she reached the door, she paused and looked back. Jaime was still kneeling beneath the chandelier, his face streaked with tears, while the crowd stood frozen, uncertain whether to applaud or weep. She whispered, just loud enough for herself, "Forgiveness doesn't need words, only distance." Then Tammy Owens walked out of the Masquerade of Souls, the place where people hid their pain behind satin and jazz. Outside, the New York wind brushed her shoulders. It was cold, but she didn't feel it. She lifted her gaze to the towers of light around her, her eyes shining with something no city could ever outshine. freedom. And inside the ballroom, Jaime remained on his knees. No one helped him up. Perhaps that was how real redemption began, not when someone lifted you, but when you finally stood up from within. The gala ended, and New York returned to its restless rhythm, rain-slicked streets, flickering neon, and the endless hum of traffic. Amid the crowd, Jaime Green walked alone, his suit wrinkled, tie askew, eyes hollow. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew that after tonight, there was nothing left to run from. Tammy had seen him for the last time, not as an enemy, but as a scar she had learned to live with. When he returned to his small Brooklyn apartment, Jaime took off his jacket and sat on the floor. The streetlight cast a dull amber glow through the window, spilling across the cracked wall. He pulled from his pocket a crumpled gala ticket, the words still faintly visible, "In honor of rebuilding lives." He laughed, a dry, broken sound, tangled with tears. "Rebuilding lives," he muttered. "Yeah, maybe it's time." The next morning, Jaime went to the Mercy Women's Center, the same place Tammy had once donated to. He met Fauna Puit, the center's director, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a calm strength. When he told her he wanted to volunteer, she studied him for a moment and asked, "You do know this isn't a place for people to earn redemption, right?" "I know," he said quietly. "I just want to do something right." She nodded. "Fine. Be here tomorrow, 6 a.m. We don't talk much here. We work." On the first day, Jaime picked up trash. The second, he scrubbed floors. The third, he learned to serve breakfast to women and children escaping abuse. At first, people avoided him. A young man, once branded by the press as the son of the devil, Jaime Green. No one could believe he was really there, working in a kitchen that smelled of coffee and detergent. But Jaime didn't explain. He just worked, silently, steadily, as if each stain he wiped away was another fragment of his own sin. Sometimes, he heard whispers behind him. "That's a Green. Is he really volunteering? Or is this PR?" He heard it all, but he didn't react, because he knew redemption has no audience. No one applauds the man who scrubs the floor. One afternoon, a woman named Kendra, a survivor of domestic violence, asked him, "Why are you doing this? Aren't you afraid someone will recognize you?" Jaime smiled faintly. "If they do, at least, they'll see I'm trying." She studied him for a long moment before saying softly, "I used to think people don't change, but looking at you, I think maybe they can. They just have to hurt long enough first." He never forgot her words. 3 months passed. Winter settled over New York, the city buried under white snow and cutting wind. Each morning, Jaime woke at 5, brewed coffee, and walked to the center. He stopped counting days. He stopped hoping Tammy might hear about him. He just knew that when he washed dishes, helped Kendra fill out job forms, or showed the children how to make little crafts, his heart felt lighter than before. One day, Fauna called him into her office. She handed him a folder. "We're launching a program, Men Understanding Men, for men who've committed violence, trying to change. I want you to lead it." "Mayor?" Jaime blinked. "Yes," she said. "You understand them. You were one of them. And I think no one's more qualified than someone who's still learning to be better." He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll try." That night, Jaime stood before a small group of 10 men, scarred faces, weary eyes, men who had once caused pain and were now haunted by their own. He spoke slowly, without preaching. "I used to think remorse meant apologizing to someone else. But real remorse is looking in the mirror every morning and not turning away. Forgiveness isn't something others give you. It's what you grant yourself so you never repeat the same wrong again." No one clapped, but something in their eyes shifted. A few lowered their heads. A few just stared at him, quietly listening. That night, Jaime walked home through falling snow. He lifted his hand, watching the flakes melt on his skin, and felt something strange. For the first time in years, he felt light. Then one evening, the post office called. A letter from Seattle had arrived. No return name, only 2 initials, T.O. Inside was a small piece of paper, the handwriting instantly familiar. "I heard you're helping others. I don't know if you do it out of guilt or out of faith in goodness. But whatever the reason, thank you for making sure my pain wasn't in vain. No signature, no address, nothing more. But it was enough to keep Jaime sitting still for a long, long time. He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his wallet, beside the old photo of Tammy, the one he'd never had the courage to look at again. From that day on, Jaime stopped thinking about forgiveness. He no longer prayed for it, nor chased it. He simply lived in a way that, wherever Tammy Owens might be, she would never again have to feel ashamed of the name Green. Spring came slowly to Savannah that year, as if the city itself hesitated to let the light in again. After a 4-month trial, the name Jolene Green officially became history, no longer a symbol of high society, but a textbook case of downfall. She was sentenced to 10 years of house arrest for violating terms of cooperation, allowed to live in her private apartment under constant surveillance. No visitors, no friends, no family. Even Jaime, her only son, had cut all contact. Each day, Jolene lived with 3 things: her glass of wine, the fading sunset through the window, and her late husband's wooden box filled with papers she had never dared to open. One evening, she finally lifted the lid. The documents inside were yellowed, but orderly, the evidence her husband had once gathered, the same evidence that had haunted her for years. Among them, she found a letter not from him, but from herself, written months ago, when everything began to collapse. The handwriting was sharp, commanding, but the last lines were blurred by spilled wine. If someone is reading this, it means I've lost. But don't mistake my exit for despair. I'm simply ending the game by my own rules. I know my son Jaime believes he's escaped me, but he forgets. A woman like me never leaves the board without placing one final pawn. In the second safe at Green & Associates, there's a hard drive. Inside are names, the ones who helped me. If I die, they won't stay silent. They will protect my legacy the way I taught them, with blood. At the bottom, written in red ink, whoever disturbs the ashes will burn with them. The apartment was silent. Outside, the wind howled through the window, cracks a sound that could almost be mistaken for her last laugh, sharp and cold, from the woman who once held a city in her hands. The next morning, when the surveillance officers arrived, they found the door ajar. Jolene lay still on the chair, her face serene, the glass of wine spilled beside her, and a neatly placed envelope by her side. On the envelope were 2 words: to Jaime. Brooklyn, 2 weeks later. The Mercy Women's Center was quiet that afternoon. Jaime had just finished a group session when his phone rang. "This is the Savannah Police Department," a voice said. "We need you to confirm some information." Huh. He froze when he heard 3 words: Mrs. Jolene Green. No tears, no shock, only the strange sensation of a heavy door closing, leaving behind the faint, smoky scent of a life he'd long escaped. A week later, a package arrived in the mail. Inside, along with legal documents, was the envelope marked in familiar handwriting, to Jaime. He sat in his small apartment for a long time, staring at it. Finally, with trembling hands, he opened it. Her voice echoed in his mind, cold, imperious, yet somehow tired. "Jaime, if you're reading this, it means I've left the game. Don't waste your tears. I never believed in them anyway. You've chosen your own path, the path of kindness, of weakness. I don't understand it, but I've seen something in you I never saw before. Light. In the old Green office safe, I've left one last hard drive. Inside are names you can't imagine: senators, businessmen, judges, all entangled. They've already sent word. If that data is released, the first people they'll come for are you and her." Jaime looked up. "Her. Tammy." The letter ended with a trembling line. "I never truly knew how to love anyone, not even you. But perhaps, for the first time, I want you to live. Destroy everything, Jaime, or we all die." Jaime clenched the letter in his hands. In his mind, Tammy's voice rose, the one he'd heard in interviews. "Justice doesn't need to scream. It only needs time." Then, but this time, there was no time left. He dialed her number. There was a pause on the other end, then her voice came, cool but controlled. "I know," Tammy said. "I just got an anonymous email. Someone's after your mother's drive." "Tammy, I'll stop them. You can't do it alone." I'm the only one who knows how they think. A long silence. Then Tammy spoke. If you truly want redemption, I'll do anything, he interrupted. Then come to Seattle. We'll handle this together for the first time, on the same side. Jaime closed his eyes, took a deep breath. His voice was quiet, steady, resolute. This time, Tammy, I'm not running. Seattle greeted Jaime with its familiar rain, thin, persistent, the kind that seemed to test one's patience. When he stepped off the long-distance bus, Tammy was already there, standing under a street lamp in a beige coat, holding a cup of hot coffee. They looked at each other, no embrace, no words at first. Just two people once shattered, now standing beneath the same rain. You've lost weight, Tammy said evenly. And you, Jaime managed a faint smile. You're still strong. She chuckled softly. No, I just hide fear better than before. They sat in a small cafe near the station. Between them lay a black USB drive, unmarked, ordinary-looking, but heavy with danger. The hard drive Jolene had mentioned had been copied and sent through a discreet channel. Jaime set it on the table, hands trembling slightly. I haven't opened it. Good, Tammy replied. We'll open it together with my lawyer. She called Cyrus Malone, Phoenix Artisan's financial advisor and former investor. He arrived that afternoon with a secure laptop and an encryption reader. The three gathered around the table in Phoenix's glass-walled office, surrounded by the brand's mottos glowing faintly on the walls. The screen came to life, flashing the words, Legacy, JG, a single video file, dozens of PDFs, names, account transfers, meeting photos, a sprawling web of corruption. Tammy stared at the list. Her heartbeat quickened. These are the entire network my mother built. Jaime finished quietly. Politics, banking, law. Cyrus frowned. If this leaks, dozens will go to prison. But it also means someone will make sure you don't live long enough to tell the story. The lights flickered. Then the screen went black. Cyrus's face went pale as he checked his laptop. Someone's hacking in remotely. They know we opened it. Jaime lunged forward and yanked out the USB. The room fell silent, only the rain pounding against the glass. Tammy turned toward the window, eyes fixed on the blurred streetlights. She's dead, she whispered. But her network isn't. Cyrus looked up. Did Jolene ever mention an heir? Jaime shook his head. She said once, I never leave the board without another piece ready to move. Days later, rumors erupted online. Phoenix Artisan exploits its workers. Tammy Owens steals indigenous designs. The Phoenix brand is just a cash grab scheme. Tabloids, blogs, TikTok, YouTube. The story spread everywhere at once. A perfectly timed storm. Thora, Phoenix's co-founder, called Tammy in the middle of the night, her voice shaking. They're attacking us. There are photos of Jaime leaving the Mercy Center. They're calling you an accomplice of a criminal. Tammy sat motionless on the bed, the glow from her phone reflecting off her pale face. She knew instantly this was the network's warning shot. Jaime arrived at dawn, clutching documents. We're being watched. How? Are you sure? I got a message. Don't touch the green legacy, or you'll regret it. Tammy exhaled slowly. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, striping her calm, cold expression. They want to scare us, she said. Then we'll answer with the truth. Jaime studied here. You're not afraid? Oh, I am, she murmured. But fear doesn't save anyone. They reached out to Opal Crenshaw, once an investigative journalist before she opened her art gallery. Opal agreed to verify the data and track the leak. But when Tammy went to meet her, the door was already open. The house was empty. On the table sat an envelope inside, a single sheet of paper with one line. Trust no one who ever knew Jolene Green. 3 days later, false stories about Tammy flooded every platform. Phoenix Artisan's stock dropped 23%. Partners pulled funding. Headlines read, From Phoenix to Fraud. Cyrus summoned Tammy to his office, voice hoarse. Tammy, we're losing everything. Are you sure you want to keep fighting? Yes, she said quietly. Because if I stay silent, they win. Meanwhile, Jaime traced the digital breach. He found a foreign IP logged into Phoenix's network right before the smear campaign began. It was registered to a law firm in Los Angeles, Hartley and Moore. His blood ran cold. Hartley, Belle Hartwig, his former lover, his mother's closest friend, the woman on the couch that night. Jaime slammed his phone onto the table. It's her. Belle Hartwig. Tammy stared. You're sure? Positive. She survived, changed her name, moved to California. She runs that firm now, and she's controlling what's left of my mother's network. Tammy's expression hardened. Then we expose her. End quote. Together with Cyrus and Opal's last notes, they mapped out the chain of evidence tracing accounts, encrypted transfers, and legal fronts until they realized Belle wasn't just the one spreading lies. She was the keeper of the master key. She had Jolene's final data and the power to destroy them all. That night, while Tammy worked late, her phone buzzed. A message with no name. Stop, or the fire will consume you. Belle Hartley isn't the only one left alive. And Tammy read it, then smiled faintly. They're threatening the wrong person. Cynic good. Tammy and Jaime drove down the interstate toward Los Angeles, the night stretching endless before them, headlights gliding like comets across the wet highway. Neither spoke for hours. Near dawn, Jaime broke the silence. Do you ever think we're repeating history? Tammy glanced at him. Yes, she said softly. But this time, I'm ending it. At Belle's office, the air smelled of polished wood and perfume. The woman who had once sneered in that wedding night room now had silver in her hair, but her eyes were still razor sharp. Oh, my little phoenix, Belle drawled. What brings you here? The truth, Tammy said evenly. Belle tilde her hill. The truth? Here? You think you can handle it? Jaime stepped forward, voice low. You used to say my mother feared nothing. Let me tell you something, she's dead. And you're the one trembling now. For a long moment, Belle said nothing. Then she lit a cigarette, her tone dark. Jolene left more than you know. Keep digging, and people will vanish like Opal Crenshaw. Tammy froze. What did you do to her? Belle smirked. Nothing. But others did. Time slowed. The ticking clock filled the silence. Tammy turned to Jaime, and in her eyes, he saw it. This fight was no longer just theirs. When they left the office, a black car waited across the street. Its tinted windows mirrored the city's neon glow, and someone inside was watching. Jaime reached for Tammy's hand, his voice low and steady. This time, I'm not letting you fight alone. The car engine roared to life, pulling into traffic behind them. And just like that, the network of shadows, Jolene Green's final legacy, rose from the ashes once more. No longer rumor, but reality. The wind off the bay whipped through the tarps along Savannah's harbor. That night, the city breathed in fog and salt, and the low wail of distant ships as if even the ocean sensed what was coming. Tammy leaned against the rusted railing, eyes fixed on the blurred lights of the docks. Belle left Los Angeles, Jaime said quietly. Where to? Cyrus's contact says she's coming here. Savannah, Tammy murmured. Your mother's city. She wants to end it where it began. Leth. They hadn't heard from Opal Crenshaw in 2 days. Police had found her car abandoned by the highway door open, keys still in the ignition. No struggle, no blood, just silence. Inside an old rented warehouse by the docks, Tammy sat at a wooden table. Beside her lay the black USB drive, the original legacy, JG. Do you think Belle will come for it? She asked. Not just Belle, Jaime replied. My mother once said, there's never only 2 sides on the board. End. Before he could say more, Tammy's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. If you want to save your friend, come to Pier 12. Alone. Midnight. She looked up at Jaime. I can't ignore it. It's a trap. Maybe. But if I don't go, Opal does. Jaime hesitated, then said, then I'm going too. They said alone. You're not alone anymore, Tammy. Not ever again. Midnight. Savannah's port was cold and metallic, the air thick with oil and sea spray. Shipping containers loomed like walls in a maze of shadow and wind. Tammy moved carefully, her long coat brushing the steel floor. The USB was tucked in her pocket. A few steps behind, Jaime held a small recorder, every sense on edge. A woman's voice cut through the darkness. So you came after all, Tammy Owens. Belle Hartley stepped out of the shadows, black coat, cigarette glowing red between her fingers. Two men in suits flanked her. Under the flickering floodlight, Tammy saw Opal tied to a chair, gagged but still defiant. "What have you done to her?" Tammy demanded. "Relax," Belle said with a faint smile. "Just precaution. I only want to talk." "About what?" "Legacy. JG. Hand it over. And this ends tonight." "You really think I'd believe you?" "No," Belle said, stepping closer. "I think you're smart enough to understand. You've already won, Tammy. Jolene's gone, the network's crumbling. But if you expose that data, you won't just bring me down, you'll drag the country with you. Don't preach to me. The people in those files deserve exposure." "Perhaps," Bella said softly, "but have you thought about the thousands who lose their jobs when the companies fall? The charities that'll die without funding? You want to be a hero or the one who burns the world to prove she's clean?" Tammy's voice was calm, almost gentle. "If the only world left standing is one built on lies, then it deserves to burn." Jaime stepped forward. "Let her go, Belle. This isn't a game anymore." Belle smirked. "Still the fool, Jaime. Your mother would have been so disappointed to see you like this." His voice hardened. "Don't say her name." The smile faded from Belle's lips. "You really think you can escape your mother's shadow? You were born from it. You and I were both products of Jaime Green." "When?" Tammy drew the USB from her pocket, holding it up. "This is all that's left of her, and tonight it ends." She threw it down, grinding it beneath her heel until the casing cracked. Belle froze, shock flashing across her face, then she laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think that ends it? There are copies. Others hold the keys. When they learn you've defied them, they'll come." "Let them," Tammy said evenly. "I've lived through hell once. I'm not afraid of the flames." Belle flicked her lighter, tossing the cigarette into a puddle of spilled fuel. "Then burn with me, little phoenix." The first explosion tore through the air like thunder. Containers burst open, fear roaring skyward. Jaime sprinted forward, cutting Opal's ropes, dragging her towards safety. Tammy stumbled, the heat searing her skin. Belle tried to run. A shard of metal struck her shoulder. She staggered. Jaime turned back, grabbing Tammy's hand, pulling her up as the warehouse collapsed behind them. They ran through fire and smoke until the night split open with sirens. Outside, firefighters rushed in from the distance. Tammy looked back at the inferno devouring the pier. "It's over," she whispered through broken breath. "Everything, her legacy, her power, all gone." Jaime nodded, eyes glistening from tears or smoke. She couldn't tell. Through the flames, Belle Hartley stood motionless, her shadow stretched long against the burning floor. The silver lighter gleamed in her hand, then another explosion drowned her silhouette in light. Dawn. Savannah's morning broke strangely soft, the sky painted gold over drifting smoke. Tammy and Jaime sat wrapped in blankets on the concrete steps, watching the last embers fade. Firefighters worked quietly. Police took statements. Cyrus arrived with a lawyer. The hospital confirmed Opal was alive, only bruised. No trace of Belle Hartley, only a melted silver lighter engraved with 2 letters. JG. Tammy turned it in her hand and murmured, "She died in her own fire, just like Jolene." Jaime said nothing. His gaze lingered on the rising smoke. "I lost everything," he said softly. "My family, my name. But maybe that's what freedom really is." Tammy looked at him, her eyes soft, steady. "Maybe. I lost everything once too. That's how I found myself." They sat in silence as the sun rose, coloring the bay crimson. Seagulls cut through the air, their wings flashing white. Cyrus approached, holding a folder. "The federal agents have the files," he said. "Belle and Jolene won't haunt anyone again." Tammy blinked. "The files? But I destroyed the USB." Cyrus smiled gently. "You think I'd let you keep the only copy? I sent one to the FBI 3 days ago. I knew Belle would come for you." Tammy exhaled, tears spilling freely now. "You always stay one step ahead." "No," he said, his smile kind. "I just believe people who've walked through fire deserve to stand in the sunday." Jaime looked at Tammy. "And us?" he asked quietly. "What now?" She met his eyes, no anger, just calm. "Now, we live. Not to avenge, just to live." Months later, Phoenix Artisan reopened its first Seattle store. Above the familiar Phoenix logo, a new line gleamed. From ashes, we learn to fly. Jaime stood in the crowd, watching Tammy cut the ribbon. No gowns, no cameras, only a woman once burned by betrayal, now standing steady in the light. After the ceremony, she found him outside. "I heard you're working at the Youth Recovery Center," she said. "Yeah," he nodded. "Not much money, but enough to live, and enough to matter." He smiled faintly. "Maybe you're the only one who believes that." "Ver." "No, Jaime." She touched his shoulder lightly. "For the first time, I believe it too because I see it." They didn't kiss. They didn't promise forever. They simply looked at each other long enough to know that peace was real. Above them, the afternoon sun glinted off glass rooftops, scattering shards of light like gentle fire. No longer the fire of destruction but of rebirth. And so, the story that began with a wedding built on deceit ended with two people finally learning how to live truthfully, not in perfect happiness, but in freedom. Seattle, a gentle autumn morning. Sunlight streamed softly through the tall glass windows of the Phoenix Artisan Museum, where the first creations of Tammy Owens were displayed: a misshapen copper bracelet, a necklace made from shattered glass, and a wooden plaque engraved with the words, "From ruin we rebuild the light." Children laughed and ran through the gallery, their voices echoing like wind chimes. In a quiet corner, Tammy, now in her 40s, sat with a cup of herbal tea, her hair touched with silver. Beside her stood Shiloh, now the executive director of the Phoenix Foundation. "You still come here every morning?" Shiloh asked. Tammy smiled. "Yes, every day here reminds me why I began." She set her cup down and looked out the window. Outside, construction crews worked on a new building, a vocational center for women recovering from abuse, funded by the Phoenix Foundation. "You know," Shiloh said softly, "people still tell your story and Jaime's at conferences." Tammy's smile deepened wistful. "Which part do they tell?" "The part where you survived, and where he found redemption. They always forget the truest part." "What's that?" "That no one is perfect after surviving. We just learn how to carry the scars without letting them lead us." Shiloh nodded quietly. Tammy walked toward the museum's largest display, a black and white photograph of the Savannah Harbor fire, taken 10 years ago. Below it, the caption read, "The fire that ended an empire and began a new life." Across the city, the old brick building of Street Mercy Rehabilitation Center buzzed with life. Inside, Jaime Green, now director of community reintegration, spoke to a group of young men sitting in a semicircle. He wore a rolled-up shirt, his voice steady and warm. "What do you think redemption means?" he asked. A boy answered shyly, "Doing good things to erase the bad." Jaime smiled. "Not wrong, but not the whole truth. Redemption isn't erasing the past. It's making sure the past no longer controls what comes next." As the room fell silent, a young journalist entered. "Mr. Green, may I interview you about the program?" "Call me Jaime," he said gently. "People say you used to be one of the bad ones, and now you teach others to be good." He chuckled softly. "Maybe that's exactly why I can, because I know how hard it is." The reporter hesitated. "Do you still see Tammy Owens?" Jaime turned toward the window, watching the sunlight fall across the garden where his students worked. "She's doing well." "So, no contact?" He smiled faintly. "We still meet once a year, at the place where everything began." June. Savannah shimmered beneath the summer Sunday. Tammy drove down the coastal road, wind carrying the scent of salt and distant waves. At the end stood a small memorial, built by the Phoenix Foundation on the ashes of the old pier, where Jolene, Belle, and the final fire had burned a decade ago. On the stone plaque were the words, "For those swallowed by darkness, and those who found the light to return." Jaime was already there, leaning against the railing, a bouquet of white daisies in his hand. Tammy approached, her hair dancing in the wind. "You're early," she said. "I always am." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the sound of the sea. Finally, Tammy spoke. "You kept your promise." "What promise?" "That you wouldn't let me fight alone anymore." "And?" Jaime smiled, nodding slowly. "And you're still the Phoenix." She gazed toward the horizon, sunlight gleaming in her eyes. "Do you think we've forgiven them?" I don't know, he said quietly. Forgiveness may never be complete, but I know I don't carry hatred anymore. Maybe that's enough. Tammy reached for his hand. No fire now. No smoke, only wind and waves. A seagull soared past, its wings slicing sunlight like a stroke of freedom. From her coat pocket, Tammy pulled a small copper bracelet, the very first she'd ever made, in that tiny apartment above the laundromat years ago. She laid it on the stone and whispered, "This belongs here, what's left of the girl they tried to burn." She learned to sing from her own ashes. Jaime looked at her, golden light soft across his face. "You know, Tammy," he said, voice steady, "that fire might have destroyed everything, but it also lit the way for us." She smiled gently. "Fire isn't good or evil. It's just light. We choose whether to use it to warm or to destroy." They stood there until sunset, the ocean turning red as wine. A ship's bell rang faintly low, mournful, beautiful. Tammy turned to leave, then paused. "Do you think phoenixes are real, Jaime?" He smiled. "Of course." "Where?" He placed a hand over his chest. "Here, in everyone who's ever fallen and stood up again." They walked away from the pier, toward the sun-washed road. Neither spoke another word, but the wind carried something faint, the soft hum of memory, the song of ashes that had learned to live. From dust we became light. From pain we learned to love. And when the world burns us again, we will sing, not to forget, but to remember that we truly lived.